Thank you for joining us this evening for the May Pueblo Historical and Archaeological Societies program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the Info Zone Museum at the Rawlings Library. This evening, we are pleased to have Sam Carlino joining us tonight to relay his family's story of their Colorado bootlegging empire. Doug Baxter, president of PAWS, is also joining us to do the proper introduction to tonight's program. Thank you both for being here tonight, and I'll turn it over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Megan. Hello to everybody, and thanks for joining the Pueblo Archaeological and Historical Society, or PAWS, and the Pueblo Library District for tonight's program. Before we get to Sam, our speaker, I'm going to make a few announcements, but I'll keep them to a minimum. If you'd like to know or keep up with PAWS news and announcements, I would encourage you to read our newsletter, The Midden. You can access the Midden by getting on our website where you can read it or sign up and get it emailed to you. Just Google Pueblo Archaeology and you'll find our website and our Facebook page. I wanted to mention something about our next book discussion group. Our next book for the PAWS book discussion group meeting will be Fossil Men, The Quest for the Oldest Skeleton and the Origins of Mankind by Kermit Patterson. The discussion date will be June 28th at 6:30 p.m. PAWS does not have a membership meeting in June, July, and August, so keep your eyes on your email and future middens for upcoming summer events that are in the planning stage. Okay, before I introduce our guest speaker for tonight, I'd like to thank Megan and the Pueblo Library District for partnering with us on these virtual programs. Thank you, Megan. We really appreciate it. Okay, May is Archaeological and Historic Preservation Month in Colorado. And in recognition of that, I would like to introduce our speaker, whose family has a significant role in Pueblo and Colorado's history. Sam Carlino is the grandson of Pete Carlino and was raised in Campbell, California. Sam has been working since the age of 12. His father, Sam Sr., instilled in him a hard work ethic, love of family and country, and the importance of following through on every task at hand. Sam has been a journeyman butcher, restaurant owner, realtor, TV show producer, director, and host, avid outdoorsman, and amateur mafia historian. Wow. I would encourage you to visit his barbecue restaurant, Sam's Barbecue, if you're ever in San Jose. Please welcome everybody, Sam Carlino.
Hey, thank you very much, Doug. And I got to thank Megan as well for this opportunity to be able to give this information that's just been kind of hidden away for so many years until I was 18 years old. I didn't find out about it till I was 18 years old. I was working at the San Jose flea market at my dad and I's sausage stand out there, and this old man was there sampling the Italian sausage, and it was an eye-opening experience for me. I found out that my grandfather was one of Colorado's biggest bootleggers, and this old man had worked for my grandfather during the Prohibition days, and he was even telling me he remembered the day my grandfather was shot. And everyone in our family always thought our grandfather died of pneumonia, and it was just an eye-opening experience to find out the truth. And so that's this all kind of goes back to over a piece of sausage, which is kind of interesting. We still make the sausage at Sam's Barbecue in San Jose, and it's just a great experience. And if you ever get a chance, give it a try. If you want something as close as could be, try in Pueblo. I know you have access to go to Gagliano's, go see Vince over there and try his stuff, because it's as close to the Carlino Brothers sausage that I've tasted. So in the recipe, the back of the book, there's a recipe. I think Doug and Megan mentioned that they might end up putting that on sites online. So make sure you don't forget about that. Anyways, let me move forward with the story of my family. First of all, my grandfather Pete and his brother Sam Carlino were Colorado's most notorious bootleggers during Prohibition era. And, I had been reading a number of different books over the years, and I saw a lot of different articles and books that have been written with a lot of disinformation about it. And it kind of, I wanted the story to be told correctly. I had a lot of information that nobody knew about. I discovered a lot of new information, putting a lot of pieces together, and it's a pretty amazing book. Because it's a great story of not because these guys were so vicious and the killers and bootleggers that they were, but the great part of the story is the way the 6 sons, my dad and his brothers, turned out. Because when my grandfather died in 1931, when he was killed, it just changed everything for my dad and his brothers. I'm positive that they would have ended up in that lifestyle if they would have continued, if my grandfather would have continued to have been living. And in hindsight, even my dad said the best thing ever happened was his father being killed, because these 6 boys ended up being, such a great contribution to society. I'm so proud of them. It was great to go. After I wrote the book, I did a book tour. I went to Denver and Pueblo. And the feedback and the response was just amazing. When Pueblo, they're some of the nicest people I've ever met. And I got to reconnect with family that we haven't seen or been in touch with in a long time. And I got to meet a lot of new friends. And it was a great experience for me. I was out there last February in 2020, right before the outbreak and how our lives were changed forever. Last time I did a presentation for Pueblo Library, I was actually at the Pueblo Library. So this is kind of a new experience for me, being able to, be in my living room and doing this type of presentation. But I want to thank again Doug and Megan for the opportunity to do it. Which is really interesting is today it was picked May 6th. It's a very significant day in Pueblo history. And it was actually the birth of the Carlino family's days of being in charge of the mafia and Prohibition in the Pueblo area. May 6th is the 99-year anniversary of Antonio Viola. His real name is Pellegrino Scalia. The day that Antonio Viola was murdered on East Mesa Street in front of St. Mary's Church. And that was very, very significant because there was a power struggle that was going on between the Carlinos and the Danas. And once Scalia was killed, it thrust the Carlinos to be in charge, and then that rivalry and that competitiveness with their kin, the Danas, got escalated. The story of the Danas and Carlinos, it goes way back to not just in Pueblo, but in Lucca Sicula in Sicily. And it was interesting because in my Denver library presentation, I met Chuck Dana, who lives up in the Denver area, and he came in and we had a nice chat. And he's the grandson of Sam Dana. And he talked to me about a DNA test that he had done. And he asked if I recognized any of the names on the list. And I looked at it and I was surprised to see my first cousin was the closest head. Oh, we're 4 cousins away from the Danas. We're very closely related to them. And I had always thought, like I said in my book, that the Danas and the Carlinos were related through the marriage of the Piscopo sisters, but that isn't it. We're actually blood related going back to Sicily, and we're 4th cousins with the Danas. And it was interesting to see this rivalry and this war that was going on between these brothers, for a good 4 or 5 years, and they were blood related cousins. And so what I want to do today in this presentation is to give a little insight on some new information that I found out. I was fortunate to find out some new information about Lawrence Baldessari, the undercover agent that helped bring down the Carlino brothers. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend that you do it. Got the website right down there, carlinobrothers.com. You can get signed and inscribed copies cheaper than you can buy them on Amazon. So you can go directly to the website and order a book. And put a note in there if you wanted to inscribe to anybody in particular. I will do that for you. And with the new information that I found, I'm going to talk about that mostly because I assume that a lot of the people that are watching have read the book. And if you haven't, I recommend that you do. But I really want to touch on some of this unknown information that's just come to light, and it's pretty amazing stuff. Lawrence Bottolesari was an undercover agent that had been brought in. He was a federal undercover agent that had been hired by U.S. Attorney Carr out of Denver to find out who the killer of Dale Kearney was. Now, Dale Kearney was a Prohibition agent that was killed on July 6th down in Aguilar. He was living in Trinidad. He got called up for a tip that there was a big bootlegging bust that was, that he could make a bust on. So he went up to Aguilar. By the time he got up there, his car had died. Somebody had taken the oil out of the oil pan. His engine froze. And just as he pulled into Aguilar close to midnight, his car just halted. So he went to a diner, made some phone calls, and he went outside. And when he went outside down the street, he was gunned down by shotgun. Nobody knew who killed him. And this was a big, big event because it was the first time a Prohibition agent had been killed in the line of duty while looking for stills. So this got the attention of the federal government. Not too long after that, about a month later, at the end of August, another Prohibition agent, Ray Sutton, went missing. They found his car in a ravine. It had been covered up, and people were looking for his body. No trace of him had ever been found. So the U.S. Attorney Carr had gotten these three agents together, Lawrence Bottolesari, an agent named Vaccarelli, another agent named Knowlton, and they met up in Denver at his office, and they decided a plan to go down to Pueblo and Trinidad area and try and find out who was the killer of Dale Kearney. The Carlinos had been suspected because they were the biggest bootleggers in the area, and that was one of the things that was their job. So Knowlton went directly they all left Denver at the same time. Knowlton went to Pueblo, or actually Trinidad, and he just got himself into a hornet's nest down there with the Ray Sutton murder. He was overwhelmed with trying to follow up on leads because this man was still missing. He was presumed dead, but he was still missing. So that took one of the two agents out of the undercover agents out of the hunt for the killer of Dale Kearney. The next one was Vaccarelli, and he jumped on a train from Denver, and he went down to Pueblo and purposely got arrested hanging around the Pueblo rail yards as a vagrant, as a hobo. So he got thrown in jail. Well, the minute that he was thrown in jail inside the holding room, one of Pete Carlino, my grandfather's top lieutenants, Ignacio Vaccaro, recognized him from Chicago days. And he started telling everyone in the cell that this guy is a plant. He's a cop, so his cover was blown. So two out of the three agents that Ralph Carr had sent down to the South to investigate Kearney's murder were exposed. So now you got Lawrence Bottolesari. Lawrence Bottolesari was a fight promoter, but he was also an undercover agent, obviously in the federal government. He was a fight promoter in Omaha and Kansas City, and he went down to Trinidad and made contact with John Kaw, who was one of Pete Carlino's right-hand man down in the Trinidad area. He owned a bootlegging outfit, of soda shop store and whatnot, where they distribute their booze, but he was also a fight promoter. And by hooking up with John Kaw, that was his end to getting close to the Carlinos. So the first thing that he wanted to do was get close to Kaw. So he got on John Kaw's card, the fight card where they would book fighters to fight, and he started to gain his trust. He had a couple fighters come in from Denver, some from San Francisco, and all this information I'm telling, I just want to let you know, is coming from Bottolesari's reports. It's fascinating stuff. So as he got closer to John Kaw, they started doing some checking on him, and they called back to Kansas City and Omaha, and in fact, he was a fight promoter back there, and actually he was a bodyguard for one of the mob bosses in Kansas City. So that was one of his references. So now this made him seem a lot more legitimate to John Kaw, and John Kaw started bringing him on different jobs where they would do bootlegging runs, just kind of for protection or sitting, as kind of riding shotgun. And they tested him the one time by sending, giving him some information that they were going to be going on a run, and the shipment wasn't hijacked or wasn't caught by the federal Prohibition agents. So, Baldessari had an opportunity to call that small little run in, but it would have blown his cover. So he was smart enough. He was looking for the big fish. He didn't want to land the minnows. He wanted to catch the big fish. And the big fish was my grandfather, Pete, and his brother, Sam. So he kept quiet, and he gained John Caw's trust. He even mentioned at John Caw's house, these guys were so entrenched in the whole community there. Not only was a lot of the law enforcement on their side because they're being paid off, but even if you got on the phone, which there was a party line back then, when you get on the phone, all you had to ask for was 1 pint for two. So if you got on the phone, picked it up, said 1 pint for two, they immediately connected you to John Caw's house, and you could set up a meeting place, or you could get your booze that way. And it was amazing to read in his report that they had actually the phone company, people working at the phone company were the ones that were help facilitating getting booze to people, during Prohibition. So Pete and Sam Carlino had been out of the area. They left in the summer of 1930, and they were gone during the July 6th killing of Kearney. And they actually didn't even return to Colorado till just a couple days before Christmas of 1930. And Pete had accompanied Sam out there, and Sam had sold a house in Los Angeles area for $3,800, which was stated in the report, and he sold a car for $1,200. That's an expensive car in 1930. $1,200 car is pretty crazy. But Baldessari ended up going up with John Caw to the Denver area when Pete and Sam got back, and that was back in late December. Baldessari finally got to meet Pete formally for the first time at his house at 3357 Federal Boulevard in Denver. And it was January 7th where there was a meeting. He described Pete as he had a swarthy face. He seldom smiled, his complexion dark. He had heavy eyes. One was a little listed, and, when he talked to you, he said that he looked straight at you, almost through you. He looked straight through you when he talked to you. And another thing that he mentioned about my grandfather was interesting. He said when he was thinking, he would kind of close his eyes a little bit. If he was in deep thought, his eyes were almost closed. And I thought it was kind of interesting to find out all these little details that that I've never known before. He very rarely talked, and when he talked, it was like E.F. Hutton. People listened. It was something where he didn't say a lot, but he observed, and he commanded respect. His brother Sam, on the other hand, was more of a playboy. Sam drank a lot. He was the better looking of the two brothers. He was a little better shape. He had girlfriends. He talked a lot. It was funny. I was talking to my cousin Carrie before she passed, and she told me that when she was a little girl, this is Sam Carlino's daughter, said her dad used to bring her and her sister to the beauty shop. And when they would go to the beauty shop, he would go visit his girlfriend. And she laughed about it. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So I thought it was kind of funny when I was reading the report about his girlfriends, and then my cousin Carrie had told me the same stories, and she was just a little girl at the time when she was backing it up. One of the things that Baldessari talked about with Sam and his demeanor was that he talked a lot, especially when he got drunk. And Ignacio Vaccaro, the fellow that recognized Vaccarelli in jail, he had to quiet him up a lot. That was one of the nephews of the Carlinos, and he was one of the strong arm guys and lieutenants for the Carlinos as well. And Ignacio Vaccaro ended up marrying my Aunt Pat. And that's another story down the road, but I'll give you a little insight later on about Aunt Pat and Ignacio Vaccaro, because it's interesting that Vaccaro was the one that had to keep Sam quiet because he would get real loose-lipped. And they didn't know that Baldessari was an undercover agent at the time. And Baldessari was gathering all this information on the Carlino gang, and it's pretty fascinating to find out how this all transpired. So after he gained his trust, Baldessari was assigned to be Sam Carlino's bodyguard. Now, it was supposed to go to Joe Petralia. Joe Petralia was a cousin from Los Angeles that Sam had sent back about 2 or 3 weeks before him and Pete had come back from California. And Joe Petralia was really excited that he was going to be the new bodyguard for Sam. Well, once they saw how smart and how well Baldessari could handle a gun, they changed their mind, and Baldessari became the bodyguard for Sam. Now, if you can even imagine that, having the underboss to a mafia group having an undercover agent as a bodyguard, it was pretty amazing story. Baldessari talked about his main goal was to find out the murder of Dale Kearney, and he, during this whole time that he was down in Pueblo and down in Trinidad area, he could never find out or get anybody to talk about it. Everyone was real tight-lipped, and he knew that he couldn't ask too many questions because, in the mafia, you start asking questions, you're going to end up in a grave. So he had to pretty much listen and ask very vague questions, and hopefully somebody would open up a little bit. So he spoke about this one night, how him and Sam were at a bootlegging joint called the Haunted House. It was in Globeville. And Globeville is an area outside of Denver, near North Denver. And they were there, and they were with a couple girls. These a couple broads they were with. And one of the drunks at the bar started eyeing the gal that Sam was with. And he got really hot. He got mad. He was drunk. He was really mad. And he made a comment to the undercover agent, his bodyguard, Baldessari. He said, hey, that guy better watch himself, or he's going to end up like the last guy who had eyes for my girl. And he goes, and, he saw an opening. He says, oh, who are you talking about? And he goes, this guy got, full of buckshot. And he goes, oh, who was that? And he goes, oh, some guy named Dale Kearney. And he goes, Dale Kearney, isn't that the guy, the Prohibition agent that went missing? He goes, yeah, but I wasn't here. I was in California at the time that it happened. And he goes, okay. So he just got a kind of admission of guilt that he had set it up. And as Sam, kind of brooded over this whole thing a little bit longer, he, after a couple more drinks, Baldessari says, God, I wish I was there to help you. And he goes, yeah. He goes, well, I had it taken care of. And he goes, well, who did it for you? And this is where Baldessari writes in his report that he thought that he had overplayed his hand and that Sam had caught on to him. But he was so drunk and so open, mouth that he just looked at him and went, it was Carlo Morello. Carlo Morello did it for me. He goes, but I got an ironclad alibi. I wasn't even in the state. So when I read this, my heart sank. My heart sank, because when I wrote the book, I did not know any of this information. And I had always hoped that the Carlino family in any way wasn't part of the killing of a federal agent. And it broke me up. I couldn't believe it. And it really touched me. And it was, sad to hear that. And the first thing that Baldessari did, according to his report, is he called Ralph Carr, and he told him the story. And Ralph Carr says, well, do you have any other evidence? And he goes, no. And he goes, well, we can't do, his alibi is ironclad. I'm sure Carlo Morello's, alibi is ironclad as well. So we can't do anything with this information. He goes, but Carr told him, he says, you have to stick with this, because, we can really get these guys on something else. And they did. Baldessari was instrumental in bringing them down. And it was interesting because not long after this meeting, or this night at the Haunted House in Globeville, this bootlegging joint, they had a meeting at Pete Carlino's house on Federal Boulevard. and they talked about the bootlegger convention that they were going to have in January, on January 24th. Well, Baldessari calls it a Congress, a bootleggers Congress. The newspapers indicated it was a bootleggers convention, but it's interesting that Baldessari listed it as a bootleggers Congress. So on January 24th, they outside Denver, they ended up having a big convention, really, of bootleggers. And Pete's idea was to organize all the bootleggers in the area and actually charge them protection money. He was going to get 25 cents per gallon of all the liquor that was sold in the Denver area. And it was protection. And, that's the mafia term for extortion. And also it was going to be put towards a defense fund. So if one of the bootleggers were to get caught, the money from the defense fund would help pay for the lawyers. And so they know that they would keep quiet, that they would, that they'd have protection. So in my book, I made the mistake of writing that Baldessari is the one that contacted the police and informed them of the bootleggers convention. And I was wrong. And according to Baldessari's report, he was totally against the police raiding the convention. Joe Roma, the boss in Denver, the other mafia boss that was a big bootlegger that actually worked for my grandfather, was not included in this new pact or this new group where the tribute money was going to be being kicked upstairs. And he was slighted by it. He was upset. He felt that he was due part of this money. So he started to go out on his own and started to recruit different crews. And he's the one that let the police department know that there was going to be a bootleggers convention on the 24th of January. And it's interesting. Another thing that I didn't know, because a lot of the reports in the newspapers indicated Pete and Sam Carlino were arrested there. They weren't actually arrested at the convention. They weren't even there. Ignacio Vaccaro was the one that was putting on the presentation and laying out the rules to all the different bootleggers. And Pete and Sam were actually at home at the time, and they were arrested at home. Yes, they were arrested, but they were arrested at home. And it was funny because the charges were for vagrancy. And they're charged for vagrancy and they're arrested at home. That was kind of funny. But they had to spend a couple days in the pokey, and they got out, and it was game on with Joe Roma. They knew that this was going to be quite a battle, because Roma had thrown down the gauntlet. He said, "Look, I'm going to be taking over the Denver area," and he started making contacts with a lot of the bootleggers down in Pueblo. And once he started making alliances with people in Pueblo, that's when things got really dicey for Pete. Roma was undercutting the prices of the alcohol because they were trying to get about $6 a gallon, and Roma was actually lowering the price down to $2 a gallon. And because he had undercut him, this was a danger for all the suppliers, for Pete, because the suppliers were making more money with Baldessari. I mean, with Joe Roma. So Sam was assigned again or Baldessari was assigned with Pete. I'm sorry, Baldessari was assigned as Sam's bodyguard. And one night, Baldessari was telling the story about how they were driving and they left a nightclub, a speakeasy. And he walked around the car. He made sure everything was safe. He looked out, everything looked good. He told Sam that it was safe to come out. They got in the car. Sam was driving. And as soon as they took off, there was a car come up behind them, and they made a couple turns, 2 or 3 turns. This car was still on them. And Sam just whipped the car around sideways in the middle of the street, grabbed a .30-30 rifle out of the back, and went up to the driver and yelled, "What the hell are you chasing me for? What do you want?" And it was a man, his wife, and 3 kids in the back of the car, scared to death. And Sam, apologized profusely. I'm sorry, I didn't. And they, kind of freaked him out. But it just showed how paranoid and hot-headed that Sam could be. It was interesting to hear that story about how and Baldessari is trying to explain to him. He says, you could have gotten killed. We could have both gotten killed if that was a gun car. If they really were, guys out trying to get you, it would have been bad for both of us. You got to use your head. And that was just a pretty significant, information about the temperament of Sam. So while Roma has been undercutting all of these, the bootleg liquor that's going through both cities up in Denver and in Pueblo area, the Carlinos are losing money because they have a lot of kickbacks between politicians and police and things like that. And they come up with this crazy idea of blowing up Pete's house on Federal Boulevard. He had a nice palatial home, 3357 Federal Boulevard, which is no longer there. It's a duplex now. It was built in the late 30s. But it was a nice 2-story home that my dad and his brothers were growing up in. And in February, they come up with the plan to blow up the house. They had a meeting on February 16th, the initial meeting, and that's where Chris McCurry, who was the firebug in the group, they called him Dynamite Chris. He was the bomb expert. And Joe Petralia and Dan Coletti and Lawrence Baldessari, the undercover agent, and Pete and Sam were there. They discussed the plan to blow up the house. Well, 2 days later, Pete is shot at 4 times on a city street. Now, Dan Coletti was his bodyguard, and my grandfather avoided 4 bullets. And he realized that the heat was really getting turned on him, and that there was a full-blown war going on with Joe Roma up north in Denver. So he was really trying to, to watch himself. It's interesting that Ignacio Vaccaro, his nephew, volunteered to go down to Pueblo to find out, because Carlo Morello, the fella that had killed Kearney, who was one of their gunmen down there, he had gone missing. And Ignacio Vaccaro at the time says, look, I'm going to go down and check up and see if I can find him. Well, a couple days later, Ignacio Vaccaro was never heard from again. And the last place that he was supposed to go to was John Caw's house. John Caw is the fella that introduced Lawrence Baldessari to Pete. He was the fight promoter and bootlegger down in Trinidad. So now John Caw, his wife, and Ignacio Vaccaro have gone missing, and they're gone. So it was interesting that Vaccaro had volunteered for this action to go down there. So he ended up going down, and he just disappeared. And I'm going to fast forward a couple months, but it's funny because John Caw and his wife were found 2 months later living alive, well, fine, in a farm in California. And that started making me think, and I mentioned in the book about Ignacio Vaccaro. He was married to my Aunt Pat, and she was a ball breaker. She was a tough lady. I could see how a guy would want to leave this woman. She was so hard on my Uncle Charlie. I felt bad for him. I hear all the stories. My dad and my cousins, they all tell me about how Aunt Pat was so brutal to Uncle Charlie. But her other husband was Ignacio Vaccaro, and he went missing. And I always thought, I wonder if it was something that maybe him and John Caw and his wife said, hey, the heat's getting too much down here. Let's just get out of here. And when John Caw was asked why he left, he gave that answer. He said it was just getting too hot in Pueblo. He was afraid of being killed. So him and his wife left. So I can almost imagine, Ignacio Vaccaro going as well with him. And he did just disappear. He was off the map. But anyways, I digress here. I'm getting back to Baldessari. So Lawrence Baldessari, the undercover agent, was now gaining the trust. He was actually hijacking trucks with Sam Carlino. They were hijacking Joe Roma's trucks, which was really escalating the whole feud. Pete had just had a murder attempt on February 18th, and things were going kind of sideways for the Carlino gang. They weren't getting a lot of money coming in, and having Bottolesari, hijacking is actually giving more credit. He's really getting a lot of credibility as someone they could trust. So on March 3rd of 1931, Lawrence Bottolesari drove my grandfather Pete Carlino to Omaha and dropped him off. Now, he had stated in his report that Pete had planned to go to Chicago, Milwaukee, and New York. There's a couple bootlegging related deals that he had to make in Chicago and Milwaukee, but he was going to New York to meet with the leader of the mafia to discuss getting rid of Joe Roma. Now, he understood that he couldn't make this move on it. He couldn't just kill Roma on his own. He had to get the okay, or he could end up being, wiped out himself. So he went to pay respect to Salvatore Maranzano back in New York. And what transpired is interesting because they sent out mafia investigators to Denver. They made calls, and they found out that my grandfather was kind of reckless, and that they were not going to grant him his wish of taking out Roma. Roma was an earner. He was just kind of playing his part. So they denied him, and they actually stripped my grandfather of his power. They neutered him, but because of his, he was one of the old timers. This guy was born in 1887. He's not a young kid. You're 44 years old in the mafia at that time. You've been around a while. So they gave him some respect. They let him live, but they neutered him. They told him he's no longer in power, and that Joe Roma would hold the scepter of power in Colorado. So he kind of came back powerless, but still alive. But he was making his way back, and he didn't actually show up back till June. But before that, Bottolesari, who has gained the trust of Sam and the Carlino brothers, was shot at in April. He was leaving the Mayflower Motel, and he was shot at. And he initially thought that it might have been the Carlino brothers that had found out about him, but it wasn't. It was actually Joe Roma. Joe Roma had an informant in the Carlino gang in the name of Bruno Moro. And Bruno Moro ended up a couple weeks later shooting Sam Carlino and wounding cousin Jimmy Coletti at Sam's house on 33rd Avenue in Colorado, Denver. And he met with that afternoon. Ralph Carr, the district attorney, the U.S. attorney, had made a press statement, and he basically told everybody that Bottolesari had been undercover and the cat was out of the bag, and they told the whole story of how he had infiltrated the Carlino gang starting back in November and become a part of this whole bootlegging process. So Bottolesari met up with Sam and all the arrested members of the Carlino brothers in jail, and Sam, he actually had a little sympathy for Sam. It was interesting to see in his report, and he said, I kind of like the guy in a way, and I thought it was kind of weird but he did. And Sam assured him, he says I did not try to kill you. It wasn't me. And he goes, no, I'm pretty sure I know it was Roma. So a lot of books have the Carlino brothers actually trying to kill Bottolesari, another federal agent, which they're not responsible for that one, thank God. But I did miss a little bit of, on the bombing of the house. I did talk about that for a second. Let me get back. On March 17th, Chris McCurry and Dan Coletti and Joe Petralia had snuck into the house. There was actually a couple police stationed in the house next door, and they got in and they put enough explosives in the house to blow that thing just straight up in the air and straight down. McCurry had guaranteed that it wasn't going to damage the houses next door, and it did minimal damage to those houses are still there. If you go to Federal Boulevard, it's really interesting. And the Carlino's house was just demolished. You see some of the pictures in the book, and it's pretty amazing. But that blowing up of the house was the first time that Baldessari had let the police know what was going on, because he had been undercover for so long and they had kept a lot of their information tight. And they finally give information to the police, and the police chief did nothing about it. Neither did the Mayor Stapleton. They sat on it and they allowed it to happen, which is kind of a travesty, having these two high government officials just sit by and let something like that happen. But let me move forward to the Bruno Moro case with Sam. Baldessari never trusted the kid. He was a 17-year-old rum runner that was out of Aguilar, and he, for some reason, he wrote in his report he never liked that punk, and it turned out that he ended up shooting Sam in the back and wounding Jim Coletti, and possibly might have been one of the shooters that were shooting at him on April 16th when he was shot at in front of the April 9th, shot at in front of the Mayflower Hotel. The car that was used in the shooting was discovered near Pueblo in a ravine that had been kind of hidden. A farmer had found it, but they had left the license plate on it. Well, they did a license plate check. It comes back that it was registered. It was sold by Joe Roma's used car lot in 1928, and the name of the buyer was Joe Pasito. Well, Joe Pasito was one of the aliases that Bruno Moro had. And it was funny because it was registered at Ignacio Vaccaro's house, our cousin's, our nephew, my grandfather's nephew's house, because Moro had been living there. So it was interesting to see how it really did tie Bruno Moro into the shooting of Lawrence Baldessari, and Roma was the one that was behind all of this. So, after Sam's killed, Baldessari went on a rampage. He really went out and he was working in alliance with the police, and they knocked out all the Carlino stills, and he knew a number of the Roma stills as well. And they broke up a lot of the distilleries, where they were distilling the moonshine and stuff, and put quite a dent in the Roma operation. And the Carlino operation was pretty much dead. When my grandfather was discovered in June of 1931, he was living for a couple months before he ended up meeting his demise in September of 1931, when he was on his way to go to Kansas City to visit Chris McCurry, Joe Petrolia, and Dan Coletti, his cousin, had gotten off, had to go to prison. He went to reformatory school because he lied about his age. And Joe Petrolia, our cousin, is the one that tipped off Joe Roma to where my grandfather would be traveling on Siloam Road outside Pueblo, and he was ambushed and killed, dragged, put underneath a bridge, and left there for 2-3 days, and nobody had discovered it. So someone actually went back and grabbed the body, dragged it out to the road, and made a call to the police, the coroners, the police, and to my grandmother. And my grandmother immediately went down to the Denver police station and said, "Hey, you need to investigate this. Somebody said that my husband's been murdered down in Pueblo." And that's how my grandfather met his demise. But it was interesting, and I know I'm wrapping things up here, almost done. But after the Carlino caper that Baldessari was involved with, he went to San Diego, and he was involved with a bootlegging outfit in San Diego, and he got a call from Ralph Carr just saying, "You need to get out of there right now." They investigated the people that were part of the San Diego bootleggers, and it turns out they were cousins of my grandfather, Pete Carlino, and we still do have a lot of relatives down in San Diego. And Baldassare almost walked into a hornet's nest and would have been, been exposed. So it was just interesting to see that that's how that all transpired with Lawrence Baldassare. But that's just like I say in the book, Baldassare was a hero to me, because if he had not brought down my grandfather, my dad and his brothers would have ended up, getting into that lifestyle. And this is the beauty of this whole story, is that my dad and his brothers went a completely different path than what they were raised in their early years. And with the passing of their mother in 1935, my dad and his brothers, younger brothers, were raised by their two older brothers, Vic and Joe, and they really took on the father figures of raising those boys. And it's amazing to see how they turned out, and they were all upstanding citizens, and I'm really proud of them. And now I understand why all those years they went by and they never told any of us about what happened, what really happened. And I only discovered this, really by accident. And it's just been quite a story. It's just been pretty amazing. But I think that you guys have a few questions. I think maybe they were talking about possibly doing a question answer thing. It's going to be difficult for me to read the comment section, but maybe Megan has
Sam,
questions she can tell me.
I came back on for you. We don't have any questions that have come in yet.
Okay.
So we'll give some time for people to have them come in. I did want to know, was anybody ever charged with Dale Carney's murder, or was that?
No, the Dale Kearney murder was unsolved. And it was interesting because there is a book written about it called Trail of Shadows, and they talk about the Ray Sutton and Kearney murder, and it did remain unsolved. The Baldassare file is what allowed me to realize that my great uncle was, Sam Carlino was behind it. And then he had Carlo Morella do the shooting. Now, there's no proof of it, but this is hearsay from a drunk at a bar. But, according to Baldassare, he was pretty loose-lipped once he got drunk.
That's interesting. I also wanted you talked a little bit about the bombing of the house. Were Carlinos living there at the time?
Yeah, so they were living there, but they moved all the family heirlooms out. There was two large trunks, and right here, if you see this, here's one of the small trunks, and my cousin Susan has the large trunk. And this trunk here, the one my cousin Susan has, was made in Denver, and this one here is actually from Sicily. This small trunk made the trip over in 1897 from Sicily to Louisiana, and they lived in Louisiana for a year before they came to Pueblo in 1898. So it's pretty fascinating. I have all my book research inside the trunk. It's really special to me. My cousin Steve gave it to me. Oh, yeah. It was his father's, my Uncle Vic, the oldest of the brothers.
We had another question. Let me read it. Was Mayor Stapleton corrupt?
Yes. He was very corrupt, and he was not only corrupt, he was a member of the KKK. And so they're actually at this time I think they're trying to rename some of the neighborhoods that are named after him in Denver area. There's a Stapleton neighborhood the folks want to have renamed because of his racist background. And yes, he was, and the Diamond Dick Reed, Richard Reed was the police chief. They're both entrenched in this.
And we have another question. Why did your family settle in Colorado, and why did they emigrate?
So my great-grandfather, Joe Reggio, and his real name was Giuseppe Mortellaro. but he changed his name to Reggio once they landed. He came in 1877, and they were in New Orleans all the way up to about 1895, 1896. Then he moved to Pueblo. They'd found out that Pueblo was a great area with a lot of promise, and things were getting hot in Louisiana for Sicilians after the murder of the police chief there, and they moved to Pueblo around 1896. And you can tell that by where the births of the children were. My grandmother was born in Louisiana, and some of her younger brothers and sisters were born in Colorado. So the Reggios came in around 1896, 1897 to Pueblo. And when the Carlinos came in 1897, it was October of 1897, they were there for probably about 6 months or so before they moved to Pueblo, where their friend Joe Reggio, which ended up being my great-grandfather. And that's where Pete and Jenny met, and was in Colorado. And they ended up in Pueblo because of Joe Reggio.
That's great. Thank you. I think that might be the end of the questions that we have, unless anybody has a quick one that they want to type in really quick. Otherwise, this has been really interesting. And I know you mentioned before we started that pretty soon here in Colorado, we can have our own Carlino moonshine. So do you want to tell?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier too, before we went on the air. So in Monument, Colorado, there's a distillery called 300 Days Distilling, and they have Carlino Brothers whiskey. It's a moonshine, a sugar moon. Basically the same way that my grandfather was making it back, 100 years ago. They would take sugar beets and distill it, and they would make the moonshine out of that. But what's interesting is what Mike is doing at 300 Days Distilling is that he takes that sugar moon and he ages it for 18 months in used bourbon barrels. And then in addition to that, I send out Pinot Noir barrels from California, and he secondary ages it, actually third type of aging, in Pinot Noir barrels. So it gets a real nice mellow flavor, and it's about the best moonshine you've ever had. It's amazing. It's real smooth. For a long time, it's only been available at the distillery in Monument at 300 Days Distilling. I think they're going to start branching out in May, he said, to where you might be able to get it in other parts of Colorado. So talk to a liquor store or ask somebody if they work with LibDib, which is one of the distributors of it. It's available here in San Jose at Royal Liquor. But other than that, it's a really, really small boutique moonshine. And I got to tell you, it's very, very good.
Yeah, that sounds great. We have one last question. Will you be updating the book?
Unfortunately, no. My publisher doesn't allow me to do any updates. And even though I have new information, I won't. But there is possibility in the future of working through a newsletter. I'll let you see this. So if you're not familiar with the Informer, and this is actually quite an issue. This is huge. And I actually have an article in this one. So Tom Hunt, he's out of Vermont. He is the foremost mafia writer in the world, as far as I'm concerned. He wrote the foreword to the book. His research is impeccable, and he gets the most accurate. It's not flamboyant. It's not sensational. It's the real thing. And I was able to contribute to this last episode of The Informer. And just look up Informer Mafia if you want to Google it. You can find every story of every significant and insignificant mafia member, like Pellegrino Scalia. And this issue was about Niccolo Gentile. and he was the first mafia turncoat to write a tell-all book. Fascinating stuff. So if I am going to write anything in the future, it would be some sort of article, probably. I don't have enough information to write another book, or my publisher won't allow me to add to the book, unfortunately.
Well, we're very fortunate to have heard your new addition to it. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that it's just been fascinating to find out a lot of details of that I never knew about, even, which is kind of neat. So, and that's what's so great about meeting all these new people, in all these cities in Pueblo and Denver, where, I'm getting information that I never had before, and it's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I think you have your website on there so people can.
Yeah, if they want a signed copy of the book, and it's actually cheaper than Amazon. They can get on carlinobrothers.com, and they can order a book and just write in the comment section if you wanted to inscribe to somebody in particular. I can do that for you, and it ships out either snail mail, media mail, or we can do a 2-day express if they want to do that. And like I said, it's actually cheaper than if you got it on Amazon, and it's inscribed and signed.
That's great. I'll look forward to that. And thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you.
Call in tonight.
Thank you. Tell Doug thank you as well. And it was an honor being here talking to everyone. And it's a great experience. I look forward to getting back to Pueblo soon.
Yeah, we'll have you back.
Thank you.